You thought this saga was over, but what just came out changes everything. A secret unsealed document has blown the lid off the case and dragged a young rising star into the storm. Her name is Isabella Ferrer, and the truth hidden inside these pages could shake the foundation of everything we thought we knew about Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and the never-ending drama around It Ends With Us. Stay with me until the end, because what I am about to reveal is not only shocking, it is unsettling, and it may just be the twist nobody saw coming. From the very beginning, this entire situation has felt like a maze with walls that keep shifting and doors that keep closing only for new ones to suddenly appear. And now with the unsealing of a portion of these disclosures, we find ourselves once again plunged into that maze, unsure of what is real, what is fabricated, and what is deliberately designed to confuse and manipulate. And the strangest part of all is that out of everyone listed in the original filings, only one name emerges from the shadows in this release, and that is Isabella Ferrer, the actress who played the younger version of Lily Bloom in the film adaptation of It Ends With Us. And the reason this is so startling is because Isabella was barely involved in the filming process at all. She spent less than a week on set, and she filmed no direct scenes with Justin Baldoni. Yet in these disclosures, Blake Lively's legal team has positioned Isabella as if she were a key witness to a sweeping list of alleged misconduct, suggesting she is aware of inappropriate comments, behavior, and even discriminatory treatment during the production of the movie. Now, at first glance, this would appear damning, but when we look closer, the narrative begins to collapse in on itself, because the only way Isabella could have known of any such alleged conduct is if someone told her about it after the fact. She was not present for any incidents, she had no first-hand knowledge, and the timeline makes that painfully clear. What makes this so breathtaking is the brazen nature of the claim. It is written as if her awareness is rooted in direct experience, but that is simply impossible because her role was brief, her presence limited, and her contact with Baldoni almost non-existent in terms of filming interactions. In fact, the only moments she spent with him outside of promotional appearances were casual, supportive exchanges, and nothing about that paints the picture being sold in this disclosure. And here is where the contradiction slams into the spotlight, because after wrapping her scenes, Isabella reached out to Baldoni in July of 2023, and her words could not have been more different than the picture painted by Lively's lawyers. She thanked him, she praised him, she called the experience life-changing. She said he created a safe, comfortable, and welcoming space, and she even described him as a wonderful, sincere, and smart director. This is not the language of someone who witnessed harassment or endured discrimination. This is the testimony of someone who felt gratitude, respect, and admiration for the environment she had been a part of, and that gratitude was so deep, she promised to carry the memory with her for the rest of her life. So why then has her name been pulled out, highlighted, and framed as a crucial witness to something that, by all available evidence, she never saw, never experienced, and never even suspected? This is the mystery that pulls us deeper and deeper, because the disclosures do not list all the names, they only show hers. And that leaves us wondering what is being hidden. Who else was listed? And why were they left sealed while Isabella was exposed and singled out? The tactic feels intentional, as if her youth, her inexperience, and her bright-eyed gratitude were being used as a pawn in a much larger game. And the effect of that move is chilling because it suggests a willingness to stretch the truth, to twist perceptions, and to weaponize innocence against someone else. What makes this even more troubling is the way the disclosure is worded. It states that Isabella is aware of alleged conduct. It does not say she witnessed it. It does not say she experienced it. It says she is aware. And that one subtle choice of language reveals everything. It tells us that this knowledge is secondhand. It was given to her, it was passed along, and the question we must ask is who gave it to her and why? If Isabella was never in a position to see these things, then her awareness must come from conversations, and who was at the center of those conversations? Blake Lively and her team. This is where the document turns from revelation into something resembling strategy, because by attaching Isabella's name to this narrative, it adds the weight of youth, credibility, and sincerity to claims that may otherwise fall apart under scrutiny. But there is a danger in that move, because the very receipts contradict the implication, those heartfelt texts to Baldoni. Those words of admiration and thanks undercut the suggestion that she carried away memories of a hostile or toxic set, and instead highlight a young actress who felt uplifted, inspired, and safe. That contradiction is not just inconvenient, It is explosive, and it raises the possibility that what we are seeing is less about truth and more about theater. A carefully staged act in a courtroom drama that has now spilled into the public eye. The other element that makes this document so disturbing is the timing, because Isabella has already fought to push back against subpoenas, and now here she is thrust back into the spotlight. Her lawyers listed her contact information included, and her name tied to allegations that she never directly supported. This feels less like legal process and more like a spectacle, a move designed to pressure, intimidate, and confuse not just the opposing side but the public watching from the outside. And it leaves us with a burning question: if they are willing to present Isabella this way, who else might be on that list still hidden behind the seal? Who else is being positioned not for what they actually know, but for how useful their name could be in building a narrative? The saga has always had twists and turns, but this one feels like a turning point because it exposes the method, the lengths to which one side is willing to go, and the way in which perception is being shaped, not through facts, but through suggestion, innuendo, and implication. Isabella is the proof of that, because we have her words, her messages, her gratitude preserved in black and white, and they paint a picture so different from what the disclosure wants us to believe that it almost feels surreal to hold the two side by side. On one hand, you have a legal filing, claiming she is aware of harassing and discriminatory conduct. On the other hand, you have her thanking the director for creating a safe, comfortable environment that changed her life forever. These two realities cannot coexist. One must give way to the other. And the fact that we are only seeing her name unsealed, and no one else's, raises the suspicion that perhaps her presence on that list was never about evidence at all, but about optics, a young actress, a heartfelt presence, a name that could sway opinion, even if the reality does not support the claim. And this is where the suspense tightens. Because if that is true, if Isabella is being used as a piece on the chessboard, then what comes next? Who else will be dragged forward? Who else will be reimagined, not as who they are, but as what they can be made to represent? The silence around the other names is deafening, and it is that silence that makes this saga feel less like a lawsuit and more like a scripted drama being played out one revelation at a time, carefully timed, carefully chosen, and carefully weaponized against anyone who stands in the way. What makes this next part so unnerving is the way the contradictions begin to pile up like bricks in a wall until the entire structure looks impossible to climb. And yet Blake Lively's team continues to build it as though the cracks do not exist. And it is in these cracks that the truth begins to shine through, because when you look at the timeline, when you examine the words exchanged between Isabella Ferrer and Justin Baldoni, when you consider the genuine warmth in her messages compared to the cold legal language of the disclosures, you cannot help but feel the dissonance, the clash between two realities that cannot both be true. Isabella called her experience life-changing. She called the director wonderful, sincere, and smart. She praised the safety of the environment and the comfort it gave her as a newcomer in the industry. And these words came unprompted, freely offered in a personal text, and the authenticity of that gratitude is impossible to fake. So how does one reconcile those glowing words with the idea that she was somehow aware of misconduct, discrimination, or harassment during her brief time on set? The answer is simple. She cannot reconcile it because the two narratives cannot live side by side without one, destroying the other. And that is why so many watching this saga unfold are beginning to question whether the disclosures are less about truth and more about shaping a story that fits a predetermined agenda. It is almost as if we are watching a novel being written in real time, one where characters are bent into new shapes to suit the plot twists demanded by the author. And Isabella is the perfect character for this moment because she is young, she is fresh, she has no long history in Hollywood. That could complicate things, and her name alone carries an air of innocence and sincerity. But that innocence becomes a weapon when it is positioned in this way. And the tragedy is that her own words, her own genuine gratitude are being buried under layers of insinuation and suggestion designed to cast her as something she never was a witness to. Darkness she never saw. The tension only grows when you remember that Justin Baldoni did not even subpoena her first. It was Blake Lively's side that moved against her months before. And that detail alone should send chills through anyone following the case, because it suggests that Isabella was not pulled into this by accident. She was targeted deliberately, and her name was always meant to serve a purpose in this larger fight. And when you realize that you begin to see the broader strategy at play, this is not about who actually knows what this is about, who can be made to look like they know something useful in a battle of perception and narrative control. It is about planting seeds of doubt and watching them sprout in the minds of the court, the media, and the public. The risk, however, is that seeds planted in shallow soil will not take root, and the contradiction of Isabella's praise for Baldoni is exactly that shallow soil that can be easily overturned and exposed for what it is, because the receipts do not lie. The texts are clear, and they show a young actress who felt nothing but admiration for the director and the environment. And yet her name appears in a disclosure tied to alleged conduct she could never have witnessed. This is where the suspense builds to a razor edge, because we have to ask ourselves if this is happening with Isabella, who else could be next, whose name might be lurking in the sealed portion waiting to be unveiled and repurposed as a character in this never-ending soap opera. The silence around those names is deafening, and every day that passes without their revelation adds to the tension, because it means the other shoe has not dropped yet, and when it does, the fallout could be catastrophic. And the irony in all of this is that the very document meant to strengthen one side of the case has now opened a door to serious questions about credibility, honesty, and motive. Because once you see how Isabella is being framed, it is impossible not to wonder if others are being treated the same way. What happens if another unsealed portion reveals a similar contradiction? What happens if more witnesses are shown to have praised the environment or expressed gratitude, only to later be reimagined as observers of misconduct? The entire narrative risks collapsing under the weight of its own fabrication. And that is why this moment feels so pivotal. It is a glimpse behind the curtain at how the play is being staged, and once you see the wires, the illusion becomes harder to believe. The audience begins to question the script, and the actors lose their power. And yet, despite this risk, the disclosures were filed this way anyway, which means the strategy is desperate enough to gamble on the contradiction being overlooked or ignored. But can it be ignored? Not when the receipts exist, not when the texts are preserved, not when Isabella herself may be forced to speak if called upon, and the thought of that testimony should terrify those who placed her name in that document, because the last thing they want is for her to stand in front of a judge and repeat what she texted in July of 2023 about how safe, comfortable, and inspiring her experience was, because that would not only destroy the weight of her inclusion, it would backfire and turn her into a witness for the other side. This is why the disclosure feels less like evidence and more like theater. It is written for effect, not for substance. It is designed to be read and repeated, not to be proven in court. And when you see that pattern, you begin to understand that this case is not just a legal battle. It is a battle for public perception, for headlines, for the way this saga is remembered long after the verdict. And that is why the name Isabella Ferrer matters so much. Because she is not just a young actress. She is now a symbol, a pawn in a much larger game, and her role is being written by forces far beyond her control. The tragedy is that her career, her reputation, and her innocence are now intertwined with allegations that were never hers to carry. And no matter how this ends, that shadow may follow her, and that is the real cost of these maneuvers. The collateral damage of a war fought not with truth, but with strategy. And the question now is, how far will it go? How many more names will be revealed? How many more contradictions will surface? And how long can this game continue before the audience stops believing the show they are being fed? The more we peel back the layers of this saga, the more it begins to resemble a carefully constructed performance, where every move is calculated not to prove truth, but to create drama. And nowhere is that clearer than in the decision to unseal only one name, Isabella Ferrer, and leave the rest hidden. Because if this was about transparency, if this was about letting the world see the reality of who might testify, then why stop at one? Why not show all of them? Why not reveal the full list? The fact that only her name was exposed is not coincidence, it is strategy. And when you ask yourself why, Isabella? Why not any of the others? The answer becomes clear, because her inclusion serves a dual purpose. It creates the illusion of credibility, while also distracting from the silence surrounding everyone else. And in doing so, it shifts attention away from the bigger questions of who else is on that list, and whether their knowledge is equally flimsy. This is why the suspense keeps building, because we know there are more names. We know there are more disclosures. We know that somewhere in the sealed portion lies the rest of the puzzle, and the deliberate withholding of those pieces tells us that they may not serve the story as neatly As Isabella does, they may not be as pliable or as useful, and so they remain hidden, and this tactic raises the stakes of the entire case. Because if perception is being shaped by selective disclosure, then what happens when the other side pushes? Back when they demand the rest to be unsealed, when they expose the cherry-picking for what it is that is when the dominoes could begin to fall. Because selective truth is fragile. It cannot withstand full exposure, and the moment the audience sees what was kept from them, the entire performance risks collapse. This is why Isabella matters so much, not because she saw something, not because she knows something, but because her name is the key to unlocking the strategy at play. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to believing that this is a straightforward case of testimony and evidence. It is not. It is a stage play with actors chosen for their usefulness and lines written for maximum effect. The problem is that real life is not a script and receipts do not lie. Those texts, those words of praise, those messages of thanks are not going away. They will surface again. And when they do, they will stand as a silent witness against the narrative being crafted in. The disclosures and that contradiction will become impossible to ignore. What makes this moment so charged with tension is the silence from Isabella herself. She has not spoken publicly. She has not defended herself or clarified her role, and that silence is deafening because it leaves room for speculation, room for both sides to spin her name into whatever they need it to be. And while her lawyer Sanford Mickelman is listed in the document, his presence only underscores the seriousness of the position she has been put in, because being named in this way ties her to allegations that are not hers to carry and forces her into a spotlight she never asked for and may not be prepared for. This is the cruelty of the tactic. It uses her as a piece on the board without her consent. And the weight of that move could follow her for years in her career, in her reputation, in the way she is remembered by audiences and industry insiders alike. And if you think about it, that collateral damage is almost too heavy to bear for someone so new to the business. But that is the reality of this war. It does not care about collateral. It does not care about innocence. It only cares about victory. And Isabella has become a tool in that pursuit. The bigger question, though, is what happens next, because if Isabella is called, if she is deposed, if she is forced to testify, then the truth of her gratitude, her messages, her praise will have to be spoken aloud. And that will create a moment of reckoning that could blow apart the strategy behind her inclusion. It would expose the fragile foundation of the claims tied to her, and it would raise questions about everyone else listed in those disclosures. Questions about whether their names were used the same way questions about whether the entire list is more about optics than about facts. And that reckoning could turn the tide of the case entirely, which is why the suspense grows with every passing day, because we know the pressure is building, we know the contradictions are festering, and we know that eventually the silence will break. And when it does, the fallout will be seismic. The other element that makes this so explosive is the sheer scale of the soap opera. This has become because it is no longer just about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. It is about Ryan Reynolds. It is about Taylor Swift. It is about Hollywood itself. And the way narratives are spun and weaponized in the court of public opinion, the Isabella moment is simply the latest chapter in a saga that has swallowed everything around it and turned what should have been a film adaptation into a real-life melodrama with higher stakes than any script could ever deliver. And the audience, us, the viewers, are caught in the middle, watching as names are pulled out of shadows. Documents are unsealed and truths are bent until they no longer resemble themselves. And the more it unfolds, the more it feels like there is no bottom, no end, no resolution, only more layers and more twists waiting to be revealed. This is why the Isabella twist is not just about her, it is about the entire case. It is a microcosm of the strategy at play and a warning of what is still to come. And as long as the silence holds, as long as the other names remain hidden, the suspense will only grow heavier, because we are left to imagine what lies behind that seal. And imagination is always more powerful, more terrifying than the truth itself until it is finally exposed. The end of all of this, we are left staring at a picture that feels less like a case rooted in fact and more like a performance staged for maximum impact. Because when you take Isabella Ferrer's name, her brief time on set, her glowing words of thanks, and compare them with the heavy accusations tied to her in the disclosure, the contradiction is impossible to ignore, and it forces us to question the motive behind her inclusion. It forces us to ask whether this was ever about truth, or whether it was about creating the image of truth and hoping nobody looked too closely. And once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it, because it raises larger questions about everyone else whose names remain hidden. what stories are being written for them, what narratives are being prepared, and how much of this battle is being fought in the courtroom versus the headlines. The truth is that Isabella may never have wanted to be part of this. She may have thought her work on the film ended the moment she wrapped her scenes. But here she is months later, dragged into a firestorm she never lit. And her silence now becomes as powerful as any testimony, because it leaves space for speculation, space for doubt, and space for the kind of suspense that keeps us watching, wondering, and questioning. And maybe that is the real lesson here, that in this saga, nothing is ever. What it seems, every revelation leads to more questions. Every disclosure opens a new door, and every silence speaks louder than words. And so we wait, holding our breath for the next unsealing, the next twist, the next moment when the illusion cracks and the truth finally has nowhere left to hide.